Hello, everybody. How you doing? Thanks for joining us today as we answer the question, what problem are we trying to solve with Value Stream? I'm Dave Rubenstein. I'm the editor-in-chief of SD Times. And this is a live panel presentation, as you can see, with, I guess, clockwise from top left. I hope it looks this way for everybody. That's Lance Knight. He's the COO, of Connect All. Chris Nowak, who's the Director of Advisory and Adoption at HCL Software, and Eric Robertson, posing as Lance Knight, Vice President of Product Marketing at CollabNet version 1. So just to kind of kick things off, we know that the concept of value stream has been around for many years, certainly in the manufacturing area, and has seen a lot of uptake in the last couple of years in software development as well. SD Times editors, in fact, in 2019, picked up on the trend, declaring that the year of the value stream. And we've seen a lot of momentum since then as organizations start to take steps to kind of create and manage their value streams, but they have a ways to go yet for full implementation. So before we answer today's million-dollar question of what problem are we trying to solve, let's take a look at where this came from and where it's going. And maybe Lance, maybe you might want to kick us off on that and we'll get going.
Hey, so value stream management, I think, came from manufacturing, of course, and how you look at things flow through the shop floor, and it's grown into software delivery. And personally, I remember doing some stuff where we were doing whiteboard sessions 7-8 years ago. We called it software lifecycle integration, where we lay out all the tools and talk about how we're going to connect them. I've been in the software integration value stream space now for quite a long time, and I think it's kind of just matured into a space and a name that really makes relevance to what we're trying to do. And tying that back to Lean, Six Sigma, all those concepts with removing waste and value stream, and then bringing it all together. It's finally taken hold, because one of the things I said last week was, if you're releasing every minute and you have nothing to release, what does it really matter? So unless you're connecting everything, you're not going to get the flow. You're not going to get those things. So I think it's taken hold from that. I'm really excited about it because we've spent so much time in it. But I think, like me, Chris, and Eric, we're more the practitioners, right? I've walked a shop floor. I've seen a Kaizen. I've done a value stream assessment of manufacturing. I think the three of us are going to look at it from a real world experience of how to implement it. Chris worked at one of the big banks for a long time doing this. Eric was working for Motorola for a while. So I just see this maturity of being able to develop software quicker with greater quality and accuracy by implementing these age-old things like value stream management, systems thinking, and so on. And it's become important, because if companies don't do it, they're going to become irrelevant. Now, I know that was long-winded. Sorry, guys. Go ahead.
No, that's quite all right. So, yeah, Chris, so let me ask you, with your experience, it seems now we're at a point with value stream where people are really looking into it more deeply. I think they kind of get it on a high level. Oh, we're going to increase our value by removing waste, let's say, or reducing wait times or things like that. So how far along do you think people are on the journey, and where does this have to go?
I think it really depends on the company. And when you look at it, it kind of is like DevOps, right? Some people, when they started introducing the term DevOps, they said, we've been doing that for years. And value stream, I think, is kind of the same way, where the shops that have been doing it really well just naturally have done it, because it isn't just about software delivery. It's about cooperating. It might be leaning out your process, and it could be different things, right? You're delivering value, and value isn't always necessarily in a piece of delivered code. And so there's a lot of teams and shops that have realized that, and a lot that haven't. I think the bigger the shop is, in fact, I know the bigger the shop is, the harder it is, because ultimately that really is about how people are interacting together to get things out the door and look at that flow, right? And I'm sure we're going to get into it later, but if you have one team that's high performing and they have to hand it off to another team that for whatever reason isn't operating like them, it doesn't work. It's about the bigger picture. Where does it go? I actually think it's kind of the next evolution of what we talk about in DevOps, because if we think about it, it's kind of the same concepts that Gene Kim talked about in the Phoenix Project, which actually came from the goal and lean manufacturing. But there's a twist because there's a creative piece to it, which I think we'll talk about.
Mhm. Creative value streams. Eric, so I know that you guys actually had a report released, I think it was just yesterday or sometime this week,
Yeah.
talking about some of the challenges that organizations face to try to implement
Yeah.
streams. So maybe you could talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think what the study found was that there were many DevOps initiatives that were not delivering, I would say, significant business benefits, right? They saw IT as running some really or delivering some really cool science projects, DevOps science projects, but the customers or the stakeholders really didn't care, right? And to them, if the customers were not having these oh my God moments of improvement, then really those DevOps initiatives or Agile initiatives really wasn't doing their job. And what I found out is that a lot of those DevOps initiatives were really optimized for IT engineering outcomes and not really business outcomes. And a lot of that was evidenced by this shiny object syndrome, this driving for just automation, right? That was the big push. They were saying that DevOps was a specialization. So to go to Chris's point, it was more about the individual teams and job titles versus a shared cultural type of mindset, and this data deployment type of mindset versus this continuous value delivery of learning and experimentation as well. And really this just focused purely on the CI/CD pipeline rather than looking at how do I improve flow throughout the entire process or through the entire value stream.
Right. So I've been going to conferences for a long time.
Sorry, Dave.
Technology conferences, and it always seemed to be technology, not necessarily for the sake of technology, but how could we improve things technologically? But it never really tied back to the business. And to me, value stream is really the first thing that's come along that says, no, the reason that we're doing all of this is to improve our business outcomes, not necessarily our technology outcomes. And that's kind of really what caught our eye when we first started writing and talking about it. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting point. Lance, what are your thoughts?
I think value stream and value stream management is human.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a human to do it. You have to go look for business outcomes. You have to go find that waste. And then you use tools to improve flow. So you decide how to improve and you find the right tools to do it. That's a human endeavor. And we've been saying that here at Connect All for some time. And I just want to get that out before Chris took it from me. But value stream.
I'm going to have to flip my page now. I have nothing.
That's it. Okay. One thing that I want to do now, of course, is to remind our attendees that we'll take questions at any time throughout this presentation. If you want to ask something, we'll see it pop up on our chart here, and we'll certainly engage you guys in the discussion as well. So that's kind of good. I know back to the conversation a little bit, everybody's talking about, well, you need to, create these value streams and create these flows. And that, I think, obviously is more of a technological issue than perhaps a business issue, even though you're keeping in mind, what the business outcome is going to be. So where do people get started doing that kind of thing? I think, again, in technology, the thought is always like, oh, we have a problem, we'll buy a tool and we'll solve it. And that'll be the end of that. But with value stream, of course, this is quite an intensive process, and it takes a while to get everything going, right? So I see you're nodding, Eric. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably, and Lance and Chris know this, the first step, or the aha moment for me, and this again is the lean concept, and a lot of folks, when they start this value stream journey or value stream management journey, it really starts with the value stream map. And really identifying those value streams, being able to map that out end to end from a process, from a lot of people may call it from concept to cash, but it's really about what are our steps that it takes for me to deliver this product or service to that end user. And what's interesting there is that when you start mapping out that current state and then start putting metrics across, like what is my lead time and process times with that? And then you start looking at, wow, how can I start improving this around this? And then that goes to Lance's point around then I can start looking at what type of tools can I start bringing into the picture as far as optimizing that to start getting that next state. And but that's not only one time I map it, it's more of a continuous improvement type of process. And that's really what's key around the value stream management, is that it's at its core is the lean type of process. So whether or not you're really doing agile or other type of methodologies, really at its core is really understanding that first level, that first step around value stream mapping. Chris and Lance, do you guys agree?
I do. I think there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. And I think we've all made the mistake of saying, here's a value stream map, or this is your value stream. It isn't a value stream, right? It is many, many value streams. You have development level value streams, operations value streams. You can have things that don't involve code that are process value streams, like a change management process itself. And then they all kind of feed in. At least, in my opinion, there's only one place in an organization where there's a single value stream, and that's at the top of the house, where you start to measure the things that matter to the business directly, risk, revenue, cost, that stuff, that kind of thing. But it doesn't mean there aren't smaller value streams that contribute to it. And so I think you have to kind of keep that in mind. And kind of, Eric, going to your point too, a lot of this is you have to pick a place to start. So you might do a value stream map, but it might be you pick something you can get your arms around, get people comfortable with the process, and say, we're going to really measure this. And it might take a long time. And you might have 50 more to do after that, but at least you know what the process is.
Right. Very interesting.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Lance. I'm sorry.
That's so true, Chris. And so here's the interesting part. We're talking about taking value out of that too, and giving the financial information, and gathering that where you can't with all the disparate tools. I've actually held value stream sessions with customers that I've worked with in the past. And it all starts with, a big whiteboard session where you bring in different stakeholders and contributors, and you map that thing out, and it looks like a spaghetti at the end, but you meld that down and you actually see what's going on. And I've done this a number of times through my career for a while. Matter of fact, when I did my first DevOps thing, it was on systems thinking and lean principles to improve flow. But it's really that you step up with this company and you say, how are we going to improve your value stream? And what you uncover is what Chris said, is that work gets broken down and takes different paths. And, I remember one time I was on a podcast with Dave, and I was saying, it's not linear, right? It's got too many things where it gets broken down and flows. Very interesting. So it's that whiteboard session that starts it all off, and then you can start to see, magically when you start doing this, you see the bottlenecks. I was talking to one company and we were doing the map, and our stuff waits in the queue for 30 days before quality can test it and do this and that. It's like, okay, but you're delivering okay over here, right? Well, we have, some dependencies and all those other things that still play in the value stream that you got to get out on a big whiteboard before you can even see how you can improve. And in that, you may say, get rid of all these other tools. You don't need those. You've got this does that. Why do we have all these things? So, and then the challenge, I guess, value stream management is hooking those things up. But the conclusion is normally to integrate a bunch of stuff, and you start with one thing. So I guess I'm really just echoing what Chris and Eric were saying. And really, it's just that big whiteboard session and a report. And then you pick tools and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I would like to reiterate what Chris said. I think it's very critical to have that differentiation between the operational value streams and the development value streams. I think it's very key because not a lot of folks talk about that. And I think that's a fundamental principle when looking at that, when making sure that you identify these operational value streams that's used to deliver in customer value, and then these development value streams, which are used to build the systems and capabilities that enable those operational value streams. But in the end, it's really about making that work visible, right? Across the different stakeholders, right? Across whether executive leadership, you're making that work visible for them, for developers, you're making work visible, making that work meaningful for them, and for the enterprise, it makes that work valuable, right? So it's how they look at work in the end and making that visible, accessible to their needs.
Mhm.
Eric, it isn't always, and I agree with everything you said, but a lot of people will think, well, I have to make this work and make it valuable. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you're doing a lot of things that never should be done at all. And it
Yep.
kind of goes back to, like, if we talk about, so Dave, a lot of people will say, well, how do I get started, right? We had the same question in DevOps. How do I get started?
Mhm.
And I think you just have to keep a couple of principles in mind. First of all, you need to start with, what's your organizational goal? What's the why of your business? What's your mission, right? You have to align your IT activity to that. If you're doing
Yep.
something that doesn't align to something that your company says is important, you need to stop doing it. And so the value
Yep.
stream, you start saying no to things that aren't approved. If you think it's that important, run it up the chain and get it approved.
Right.
Yep.
Which is good because that kind of breaks it down. This can sound like it could be really overwhelming. Well, you need an operations value stream, a business value stream, and putting this all together. And it was nice that you kind of broke that down as to where people want to first start. One of our attendees, Melissa, was asking a question. So how do you advise somebody to even introduce value stream thinking in their companies? How do they even begin the conversation? Anybody at all? Let's start with you, Lance.
I knew you were going to do that. So, I think the way that I would go about it depends on where you are in the organization. But if you're, somebody who's just doing development, doesn't have subordinates and all that, you start by just kind of creating a knowledge base about what it is and what it can do. And you kind of just climb it up from there. You try to find a place where maybe you can introduce those concepts of value stream and so on so that you can release quicker. And just really continue to do that until it climbs up. And at the end, if you're at that level, you may not get the full credit for it, but at the end, you'll see that it happens. So it's really about creating a groundswell from down below. Maybe just look at internally in your own organization saying, hey, I can use some of these lean principles to improve how I'm delivering software in just my team, right? It's that kind of thing. Just start to look at those. Hey, this, I just mapped out this little thing that is just what we're doing, and I can see this takes 10 minutes to do this. But if we did this, it would solve it. Now you're starting to bring in some of those lean type principles, right? And just handle this, smaller parts of the value stream at a time. And if you could just introduce some of that in your daily thing, that'll help that success grow.
Right.
That's the best kind of way I can think to. Now, if you're at a different organizational level, you're going to look at that differently. No matter where you are, you're going to look at that differently, right? If you're a developer, your biggest pain is rekeying in things in different tools. You're not really caring about, some of the other stuff. If you're the next level up, you're worried about how long it takes to get through whatever. So your pain climbs, and the higher up, the better, and the more that pain magnifies, because then it becomes a black box of IT or the black box of software delivery. It goes in or it comes out. So start there. Start where you could just bring a little bit of value where you're working with lean principles and some of the basics of some of the value stream stuff.
I'd like to, I'm sorry, Eric, did you want to?
Yeah, I was going to extend on Lance, and it brings up your point around where you're not necessarily talking about just one big value stream, right? It could be multiple value streams that make up these value streams. And again, Chris, I want to bring up the point that you make around it's very key to really focus around what are my key goals and objectives that I'm trying to achieve here, right? And being able to do that at the strategic level, we have when we work with customers, especially customers that apply methodologies like SAFe, have this concept of like strategic themes, right? Where you can have these strategic themes and these goals and objectives, and then start aligning your value streams, multiple value streams to that. And to Lance's point, depending on where you are in the organization, you have a different role in the piece that makes that up. The key is to make sure you understand how what you're delivering, your role maps to that objective, right? Because that shows to you that what you're working on is meaningful and driving value to the organization. That's what I want to say, Chris.
Right, and that's 100%. I think I was going in the same place. This can feel really complicated, and and we've all been there, I think, right? But keep one thing in mind. You want to work on things you have the power to work on, and you can do that depending on what level you are, right? But I would say one principle you need to keep in mind, and this was actually, it was the first way in the Phoenix Project, and it goes way back. Understand that you're working in a bigger system. So don't do it blindly, because there's another philosophy or a theory that says if you optimize your area in a small way, in a way that's outside everybody else's scope, it can actually hurt the larger goals. So it doesn't mean don't do something where you are with what you have, but it does mean try to keep it in context with what your neighbors are doing and what the organizational goals are. And because there might be a time when you say, you know what, I'm going to give you a great example. If we worked on just the development team and we sped up their CI process so they could pump out 1,000 builds an hour, how's the testing team going to feel if you didn't do anything to help them absorb that? What you've actually done is made it worse for the organization, because now there's going to be friction between testing and development. There's going to be finger pointing. There's frankly going to be wasted software sitting on the shelf that's probably perishable, and the ROI deteriorates the longer it goes without going to production. So you have to actually consider what is the flow of the whole system before you actually say, you know what, I could increase my build by 1,000%. It might not be the right thing to do, maybe 50%. So just keep that in mind as you optimize your local areas.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the that we found in that study that David, you brought out, where they only focused, let's say, optimizing that CI/CD pipeline. And then it was about, well, what about automating tests? What about infrastructure code? What about the delivery aspects? What about release on demand? So it's basically looking and improving the flow thing. And that's where the value stream concept becomes very important, because you're looking at it beyond just the typical CI/CD mindset that a lot of folks have when talking about DevOps.
Right. And so I guess the short answer to Melissa's question is, how do you introduce the value stream into your company, the thinking? It's pretty simple. It's like, you don't have to really invest anymore. But if you start to become aware of the bigger picture, that's money. That's free money you can just pick up, because it's basically wasted efficiency you have today. It's a pretty easy conversation. It's hard to do.
Yeah, it's a systems thinking mindset as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have another question from Rajesh, who wants to know, how do you handle the complexity of tracing the value stream through multiple iterations and releases and projects? What are they supposed to trace? The value, the waste, the effort, all of it? I don't know. Chris, let's start with you on that.
There's 100 answers here, and every corporation is going to say they have something else. If you're a regulated industry, they'll want to know your risk, for example, and everybody cares about cost and revenue and everything else. But I'm going to go back to somebody who actually wrote a book on it, even though we said we're staying away from books and we're going to stay on the shop floor. The cost of delay. If you can look at the cost of delay, right? Don Reinertson, the principles of product development flow. That's probably, if you had to pick one thing, measure your cost of delay at all the different parts. And that's, again, you don't improve a point process, you collapse the times between the process steps.
Yeah, I would have to agree, Chris. One of the big foundations with that is the cost of delay metric that we have. And if you do read Don's book, which I had the pleasure of, he goes into, there's different aspects of cost of delay as well. So it's not as simplistic as just one type of metric. It's different aspects of how that cost of delay can impact your business and impact your flow.
Right. Good. All right, another attendee is Jonathan, who says his organization has a wide range of buzzwords: business process optimization, IT operations management, change management, which seem to be subsets of the same concept in his mind. So he wants to know, how are those things different in a value stream environment, or are they? And Eric, why don't we start with you on this one?
So which steps did he say? He said, so there's a lot of buzzwords around.
And IT operations management, change management.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, it's a lot of buzzwords, right? But in the end, it's about the business ability to adapt, change, learn, and pivot and deliver at speed because they're all being disrupted, right? In this competitive market. And gone are the days where the big eats the small. Today it's the fast eating the slow. So really it's the ability to learn and deliver faster than their competitors. And pretty much you're very surprised, even like Chris could speak to this in the banking industry now, it's not the typical standard bank that you would think is your competitor now. It's these smaller startups, right? I mean, I look at my nieces and nephews right now have these little apps that they use for their paychecks. They don't even go into a bank, right? Yeah, right. So it's how do these companies are looking at how can they have a sustainable competitive advantage as well? So value stream techniques, capabilities, it's just one of those abilities where they can hope to achieve that business agility, because that's really what they're looking for, is how do they stay competitive and move fast as well. Chris,
So you have a lot of moving parts here. You have different value streams in different areas doing different things. How does value stream management play into, or how is it important in terms of governance and security and compliance and all those things that organizations are always very concerned about? So Lance, you want to try that one?
Well, I think one of the interesting things right now is that people are looking for value stream management to enforce governance, security, and policy simply by managing flow. The information won't flow unless it meets these regulations to the next stage or the next step, right? And most value stream management tools should be able to do that. But still, it's human of defining those and setting them up. But really, that's it. If it doesn't meet this regulation review, or there wasn't a code review, or something didn't happen, it wouldn't move forward. That's the same in manufacturing. If something didn't meet testing standards, it would go back to the system there and get reworked. So it's that kind of stuff. And then using that to help as you're moving things through a workflow type of thing and managing things through your value stream more appropriately. And the breaking down of that makes that even worse, because different things have different standards according to what they're doing. So you have to manage all the multiple different value streams in their different flows in order to make sure everything's regulating right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that.
Oh, go ahead, Eric.
And that's where I see, if you look at the next step in the evolution in the value stream management story, I think that's where analytics and intelligence and monitoring, real-time monitoring, is going to come into play there. Because when you are in these highly regulated type of industries, you need to be, it's almost impossible to be able to manually go in and be able to understand all and monitor these control points manually from that standpoint. You have to have automation and intelligence layer to be able to do that. And that gives companies the ability to immediately identify bottlenecks and immediately identify the ability to pivot, especially work in progress, right? And that's something that, Chris, I was very impressed with. One of the demos that you guys did was that ability to be able to monitor and see that work in progress and to be able to pivot or persevere based upon the direction it's going.
Yeah. I know Lance and I had this discussion. Chris, I didn't mean to jump in. I'll give you a chance in a second. We were talking about metrics and which ones people really should be following in a value stream environment, and how they're different from perhaps what the typical business metrics might be. There might have been a somewhere.
When did we have that conversation?
Thank you.
I mean, we went into all the different, we talked a long time about the difference between metrics and measures. Is that a measurement or is that a metric? How to look at that metric and use it to improve. I mean, we can capture all kinds of metrics, right, but is it relevant? Yeah. And Chris and I just had that conversation before we started the webinar. And unless you're really putting out metrics that matter and you're capturing information with metrics that matter, then you're just putting in overhead and you're creating waste. And I think one of the things, I think there's a reality check here we have to take with the value stream a little bit. And this is about a particular metric. And it's how do you really calculate cycle time across the end-to-end multi-streamed value stream effectively? And that takes a lot of work and knowledge to be able to do that. Because your work comes in and work intake, it gets broken down and put into different places. Maybe your COBOL teams have it and they're running waterfall still. And then you have really cycle time, whatever. So you have a lot of, to Chris's point, wait time waiting for all these teams to catch up. And those are the types of things you got to look at as well. But capturing a whole end-to-end value stream in getting cycle time through your whole system of delivery is something that I've rarely seen able to do because of the organic systems that have been built that are doing value stream and doing software delivery today. It's not an easy metric to get. Now, in manufacturing, it's an easy metric to get. Work comes in the door, work goes out the door, goes through cells, and you have it. But here it's a whole different ball of wax. And the size of the bread basket into IT is always different as well. So that's where metrics become important, of looking at averages, not measurements.
Mhm.
So that was the conversation. Was that the conversation we had?
Yes, that was
Okay,
it.
good.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I like the comment there. I think one of the Lance, you mentioned that we both worked in the manufacturing world. I think the big difference here, if you look at the supply chain from the manufacturing versus in the software, in the manufacturing world, as you know, it was a lot of it was about repeatability and optimizing that, right?
Yep.
Right. In the software world, if you're not changing throughout that delivery, then it's a problem, right? At least I hope you are. If you're not, then that's another topic of discussion, right? So the difference is that in the manufacturing world, you had more of a stability and the repeatability in the product that was actually being produced, right? But in the software world, it's really about the quick adoption and the changes. So what you started with here and the ending with most likely will not be the same, because you're making these changes and adapting to it. And so the process and the metrics around that, because you're working toward a different outcome, right? Versus a different outcome or metric versus than what you may have been doing in the manufacturing world. And I think that's a different of a mindset change that that customers may struggle with as well if they just use pure lean manufacturing concepts.
Yeah.
And my point to that as well is that the outcome and the inputs are always different.
That's right.
Rework. So it becomes even more challenging from that perspective to think about,
Exactly.
Cycle time, lead time, wait time on things. So you got to use that.
Exactly.
That's why that metrics conversation came up.
So
Exactly. And that's why it's easier. That's why the cycle time, lead time, that's why it's a little bit easier on the manufacturing world versus in the software world, right?
Absolutely.
Dave, let's get a little more explicit about that, because we're exactly right about what we're talking about. There's actually multiple phases, I think. All right, so Lance is right. The inputs that you have are basically different every single time, unlike I'm going to produce this widget. I actually look at the whole thing in a number of phases, and the first phase is a creative phase. The development phase is create, and if you think about it like ITIL, it's the service design phase, right? It necessarily has to be open-ended so developers can be creative. But at some point, you have to put process control around it. So there is a shift in this whole value stream where it moves from creative to controlled. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's the minute they check in the code. From that point on, everything should at least be fairly, statistically stable, right? And it should be repeatable and transparent through the whole thing. There's actually a third phase, I think, too, and we never talk about it, and we should. It's the biggest phase. It's after you've done development and you've delivered the code, 90% of that software's life is out there with the customer. And we often, in this conversation, neglect to say most of that experience of what you just created happens after the production release. Do you have okay customers? Are they happy, or are they like fanatically happy, like frankly Apple customers, right? It's a religion. They buy into it. And so you have to actually think about that post-production release area as well. And all the folks on the ops side, ops is a big bucket, by the way. It's like everything after you check in the code, and it can be a lot of things. And it's those folks, those heroes and heroines that keep that running. And that's even more, that's a different kind of having to be stable, because they're subject to many outside forces that's trying to knock them off kilter. And so when you think about that value stream, what the real value is, we have a company, we have a mission, and we have an idea, and we have a set of customers who want that. Well, how do we give it to them and keep them happy while they're using it? And that's a really big value stream loop, right? And I know it's a lot to kind of absorb, but if you take care of the parts, you start to take care of the whole.
Right. So let me ask this question, because I know that we're talking about process primarily, but as Lance had said, when you're in manufacturing, you're making a widget, it's the same thing all the time. You have your process and all. Do the changes in software requirements and the type of projects that people are working on, does that affect the map that you've created? Does it affect the types of value you're looking for out of it? Or is it, every project gets kind of put through the same value path? Eric, you were nodding. You have a thought on that?
Yeah, so I think this kind of goes back to Chris's point, where if we look at it beyond just the CI/CD pipeline, right, and then begin, you kind of have this. I think SAFe uses the term continuous kind of exploration, right? Or some folks may call it design thinking, right? But it's basically taking that idea and those concepts, and then when I start going through that CI kind of CD process, I think it is a key differentiation between the deployment and the release on demand, which is actually out to the customer, right? Where you start getting that feedback and you start incorporating that back in to your process. And at every deployment or even release that I do, I need to make a decision where, based upon my objectives, this goes back again to objectives and what I'm trying to achieve. This kind of goes back to this lean mindset and minimum viable product as well. I need to understand whether or not I need to persevere or pivot, right? I think it's a book that talks about this as well. And I think that's a very key concept around that, because what I'm doing is really about kind of the learnings, right? I want to be able to quickly learn and to quickly adapt to that, right? Because every learning that I do I may end up, I may not continue down this value stream. I may stop this value stream, or I may have reached my goal. So I don't need to continue to have this value stream completed at 100%, right? My goal may be able to be achieved without me having to reach 100% type of completion, right? So is that ability to quickly change and pivot to move on to other higher priority type of value streams that may have higher priority to the business, right? So that capability is very key. And that's something that I think customers are looking for. And that's all part of that business agility and ability for them to very quickly learn and pivot in this competitive market.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, so I want to get back to a point that Lance had made earlier about value stream management being human, right? So as a human, what does it mean to be in the role of managing the value stream? How do you go about doing that from the human perspective?
I think we're determining that still today for IT, of what that role is and how to do that as a human. And I don't know, Chris, you guys have a value stream manager over there at HCL, so tell me what he does every day.
Wow. All right. You know what? At the risk of saying I don't know, I think, the real answer of that is appointing somebody whose job is to kind of keep the eye on the ball and to think about the things we've been talking about for 40 minutes, which is we have different groups of folks that are responsible for certain things. And all of those things have to come together at a certain point. So they are kind of looking at the value stream, whether you have a tool to do it or whether that's conversations with 100 people in the hallway. Hey, did you know so-and-so was doing this? I did not. I better go do this. They just manage the value stream by having a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that listening to all the groups and having that empathy across groups. I mean, I think that in the end, that's kind of what it is. As to who's responsible for it, I always say also, I've done a couple of presentations where I said, who in this room has a leadership position in IT? And, some people raise their hand and I go, no, you're wrong. You all do. You all can be leaders at your level. And I do also think that value stream is the same way. You can start doing these things right now. You don't have the box on an org chart, but you can be a value stream manager by just looking at what can I do in my group, keeping it in the context of what the larger organization is doing. It kind of is that simple.
Is there a disconnect between having groups be autonomous and kind of lead themselves and control themselves and tying it all together at the end? Is there
It's horrible. I think if you have a bunch of groups that aren't working together and they work for the same company and they're even remotely tied to the same business outcomes, yeah, that's a problem. And it kind of I think Jonathan asked the question. He said, well, I've got subsets of value stream in change management and IT ops and all these other things. He just listed off a bunch of silos that aren't talking to each other. So yeah, the role of value stream, the way we're talking about it, is to have conversations with all those folks and say, why don't we all get on the same page?
Right. So that I kind of put a little bit of my manufacturing background in here on this, and this is a point that I was thinking about with this value stream management role emerging in IT. And I've got to say that my product manager, Andrew, disagrees with me on this, but that's okay. That role is kind of the person who's going to continue to look at how things flow and look for process improvement along the whole value stream. One thing we got to be careful of as we start to label this person and put them into IT is we don't want them to be expediters. So in manufacturing, there's a role called an expediter, right? They take that stuff, they run it on the shop floor, make sure it gets done and all that. And this role here is not that. It's somebody that's always looking at how information and work gets done and proposing solutions to improve flow and do continuous improvement. As long as they're not expediters, I think we'll get good returns on that. But the moment they become an expediter, I think it won't have the impact that a value stream manager would need or would be in an organization.
It's a great point. And I think if they actually were the expediter, what they're doing is disrupting value streams.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I would concur there.
Yeah, that's great. So it seems to me that we've spent the last 45 minutes actually answering the $1 million question, but let's tackle it head on now and just say, so what exactly is the problem that organizations are looking to solve when they embark on a value stream trip? Lance, why don't we start with you?
You always start with me, Dave.
No, I've gone around.
Right. Here's what I think here's my point of view on that. And I think that what we're trying to solve is time to market, time to value. I mean, you can boil it down to all little things that we could try to figure out and do. And Eric brought it up today. It's either you adopt, become more relevant in these digital transformations times with software. I've said this in speaking slots, there are credit unions that are falling behind that nobody's working with because their mobile phone offering doesn't work or isn't good. So people are leaving them. So from a business perspective, you have to be able to release software quick, relevant with quality to your end customers. And that's really what value stream management and improving value stream delivery is about. Time to market, time to value, and those types of things. And it all boils down. But that's kind of how I look at it.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, you have to agree with what Lance said, but I'm going to pick up on very one specific word that he used, relevant. Whatever you're doing has to be relevant to the people that are consuming the product. And they could be internal consumers. You might be running a platform services team. Developers and ops are your consumers. Or it could be somebody on the other end of their checking account. But whatever you're doing, you can't just do it because it's a hobby. You have to do it because your company said this is what we do and the customer said this is what we want. So the value stream helps you stay aligned, keep that alignment between the organization and the customer, and then keep it transparent. And of course, time to market helps with that relationship.
Great. And Eric?
Yeah, I would have to concur. Lance and we use this analogy as kind of like you have this kid that's in college and they're in their fourth year and you're telling them time to pick a major. right? And so what's happening is you had this time where you had these multiple teams that were able to pick these different team tools, and they told their management it's free, don't worry about it. But now all of a sudden management's getting these bills and they're like, hey, what's going on here? I see that you're producing a lot of output. You know, I used to be able to map this to my strategic plans and to my portfolio management type tool, but I don't know what your output is producing the outcomes that I'm getting judged on, right? And I'm footing the bill for these bills. Time to pick a major, right? It's time now to actually start adapting and saying what I need to understand what you're producing, how you're producing that, how does that map to my stakeholders that's driving outcomes to my business.
Exactly. Sounds great. All right, we're just about up against it in terms of time, but I do want to give you all an opportunity to give me a 30-second or so takeaway for our attendees, so that if they're looking to get started on a value stream quest, maybe some advice as to where they might want to kick that off. So we'll start with Eric this time, so Lance doesn't shape again.
Sure. Believe it or not, I think Lance and Chris kind of stated where it's really about whether or not you're doing your Agile or DevOps initiative. It's really about applying it to that end-to-end value stream, right? And you may refer to as concepts of cash, but essentially it's involving everyone who plays a part in that delivery process, to the planning, design, build, test, release, support, and really start talking about building a culture of continuous delivery across the entire organization, across your teams, your departments, your suppliers, your technology. And what this does is that enables to create a continuous delivery pipeline that enables business outcomes and integrates those people, those processes, and technology throughout the organization, right? And that enables them to produce enable products to flow to customers in an order of magnitude at a higher velocity, quality, and security. And that really takes DevOps truly beyond just the CI/CD pipeline mindset that it's currently at.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, you're going to get the three of us saying the same thing, but the way I'm looking at it is DevOps was born to help Agile come along to the next evolution of the challenges it couldn't solve easily. And I use one acronym. There's a few out there, but you've all heard it. CALMS, CAM, whatever. It's culture, automation, lean process, and metrics and measures. And that was supposed to be DevOps. And what we really got in most cases was we got the measures, CI/CD, and we got the automation, and we kind of forgot in many cases about the lean process and the culture. Value stream management is saying, hey, you forgot about the C and the L, and that's what we're going to do for you. We're going to help you with that behavior, that co-empathy between groups, and frankly, that lean idea of aligning to organizational goals. And so I think that's why I said in the beginning, value stream management is the next evolution of DevOps, kind of picking up the pieces. And let's face it, the technical parts are easy. And as technologists, that's what we love to do. I'm like, oh, I can play with the tool. Great, let's install it. That's not the hard problem, right? The hard, wicked problem is the human problem that Lance opened up with. And now value stream management is saying, if you really want to be at the top of the heap, you now have to deal with those organizational behavior. I don't want to say it's a behavioral problem. The ability to get more people swimming together in the same direction.
Right. So I completely agree, of course, with all of us. But I think I've said this before, and I have a couple articles out on this exact same topic. It's what Chris said. It's the enforcer versus the collaborator. It's trying to create a culture where you're continuous delivery, and you do that by coming together and trying to improve the way you do work together. And value stream is a great word and vessel to allow that to happen. The biggest thing we should take away, there's no tool that's going to solve those problems. And we all sell a tool on this particular podcast webinar.
And counterintuitive then, I think.
Right, there's no tool. Our tools are here to help you affect change and to get better after you determine what you do. It's always going to take a human. So I'm going to leave with that statement that I've had for a while that, I formulated with my product manager, Andrew. It's a human endeavor. Us tool suppliers are here to help you remove waste in your organization, but you've got to learn how to remove waste. So go learn some of these lean principles, read a book on systems thinking, read that other book that they were talking about that I haven't read. Now I got to go read it. And I think that's the biggest takeaway.
Great
Yeah.
stuff.
You know,
All
there
right,
was,
so, I'm sorry.
Dave. Yeah, it reminded, there was a quote and I forget who said it, but they said, DevOps isn't something you buy, it's something you are or you have to be, and you have to do it alone. And it kind of just ties right into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a mindset. It's a mindset.
Great. All right, so I want to thank our speakers today, Lance Knight, again, COO of ConnectAll, and Chris Nowak from HCL Software, Director of Advisory and Adoption, and Eric Robertson, of course, VP of Product Marketing at CollabNet. I'd like to especially thank ConnectAll for sponsoring today's panel. We hope you guys got a lot out of it, a little different for us. It wasn't just a 40-minute PowerPoint slide, and I thought we touched on a lot of really good topics here. So I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times. Until next time, so long, everybody.